Welcome to yet another edition of the SABC News COVID-19 Global Wrap, where myself, Babalole Phaka, and my colleague Busisiwe Khatebe bring you highlights of stories which dominated news headlines throughout the week with regards to the coronavirus. Global confirmed COVID-19 cases currently stand at over 6.7 million, with over 3.2 million recoveries and over 390,000 deaths. South Africa currently stands at over 40,000 confirmed cases, with over 21,000 recoveries and over 800 deaths.
In South Africa, Minister in the Presidency Jackson Mthembu says that the national state of disaster, which President Cyril Ramaphosa declared in mid-March for 3 months, has been extended to July 15.
As we all know, the national state of disaster can only last for 3 months or 90 days. And the 3 months or 90 days of the current national state of disaster expires on the 15th of June this month. That's why it was then necessary for the Minister of Culture to request Cabinet to extend the state of national disaster by another month, which is allowed in law.
Mthembu also announced that Cabinet will seek leave to appeal the High Court in Pretoria ruling that the regulations under the national lockdown level 4 and 3 are unconstitutional and invalid.
Cabinet wishes to assure the nation that all interventions introduced since the declaration of a state of national disaster in March 2020 by President Cyril Ramaphosa have been directed primarily at saving lives of our people. The restrictions placed on the movement of individuals and on the level of activity in the economy have been directed at slowing the spread of COVID-19 infections. While government appeals the court judgment, current regulations remain in force.
Staying with court news, the same High Court in Pretoria also ruled on Thursday that COVID-19 patients may not be forced into state quarantine facilities.
Yes, AfriForum achieved a victory in the North Gauteng High Court in Pretoria, and the judge granted AfriForum's urgent application to declare that the regulations that were aimed at putting everyone who tested positive for COVID-19 under compulsory state quarantine invalid. The department failed to oppose AfriForum's application, and the minister agreed that AfriForum's application should be made an order of court, which determines that the regulation should be read in such a manner that people who are able to effectively self-isolate be able to do so.
President Cyril Ramaphosa visited the Western Cape to assess the provincial response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The province currently accounts for nearly 2/3 of infections nationally. Deputy President David Mabuza visited the Free State to also assess their state of readiness in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. After assessing the readiness of the reopening of schools, Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga says that schools without personal protective equipment will not be allowed to reopen. Learners from grades 7 and 12 are now expected to return to school on June 8. Legal expert Saber Ahmed Jazbeh says in the event that a child contracts COVID-19 while at school, the state will have to take responsibility. On to the rest of the continent. Confirmed COVID-19 cases in Africa are over 170,000, with over 75,000 recoveries and over 4,700 deaths. The World Health Organization has urged African countries to be cautious when easing lockdown restrictions.
The recommendation from WHO is it has to be a phased approach, and South Africa is doing that, and many countries are doing that. It has to be a phased approach. And at the same time, we need to continue to strengthen, especially the case identification, tracing, and other public health measures.
Authorities in Tunisia, however, maintain that the country will open its sea, land, and air borders on the 27th of June in hopes of rescuing its tourism industry as the COVID-19 pandemic comes under control. Ugandan medical workers say they lack adequate supplies of personal protective equipment for tackling COVID-19, and the risk of infection is making some reluctant to treat patients. And lastly, in a virtual meeting on the latest regarding the continent's tackling of the COVID-19, the Africa Center for Disease Control and Prevention Director, Dr. John Nkengasong, says that in the same way, armies have been trained in Afghanistan and Iraq to strengthen public health, we need to train armies of public health workers in Africa.
We are dealing with a new virus. We are learning every day, and we are trying to understand our pandemic as much as possible.
And now for international news. The United States of America currently sits at over 1.9 million confirmed COVID-19 cases, with over 700,000 recoveries and over 110,000 recorded deaths. A series of violent protests sparked by the death of 46-year-old George Floyd continued throughout this week. There have been several solidarity protests in other countries. Floyd, who was unarmed, died during his arrest by police. In his documented last minutes on a viral video, he can be heard saying, "I can't breathe," as one police officer kneels on his neck. The phrase has become a prominent slogan during widespread protests over his death. Despite high COVID-19 infections and social distancing regulations, thousands of protesters took to the streets under the hashtag Black Lives Matter to express their rage and frustration over the latest incident of violent acts against Black people in the United States. Friends and family members also gathered in Minneapolis to pay tribute to Floyd in a first of a series of memorial services ahead of his funeral next week. They were joined by thousands of Americans, including politicians and celebrities, who all rallied behind the call for justice for his death. In South America, Brazil is aggressively moving towards reopening its economy and easing lockdown measures, despite a record number of daily deaths and infections from COVID-19. 1,349 new deaths and an additional 28,633 confirmed cases were recorded on Wednesday. According to a Reuters report, President Jair Bolsonaro continues to downplay the threat of the virus, saying on Tuesday that death is everyone's destiny. In Asia, Indonesian airliner Lion Air had to cancel flights after reopening them last month due to passengers not adhering to COVID-19 regulations, including health disclosures and social distancing practices. In a statement, the airliner said many prospective passengers were unable to carry out air travel because they did not complete the required documents and conditions during the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic alert period. Residents in Hong Kong commemorated the bloody crackdown by Chinese troops in and around Tiananmen Square by lighting candles across the city on Thursday after police officials banned a night vigil. Police said mass gatherings could potentially pose a public health threat as the city reported its first locally transmitted COVID-19 case in weeks. And in Europe, Chancellor Angela Merkel's ruling coalition this week agreed on a €130 billion stimulus package meant to aid Germany's recovery from COVID-19.
For the latest updates on the coronavirus, visit sabcnews.com.